Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're not just unpacking a story, we're trying to understand a moment in time that the source material suggests is this massive closing chapter to a national saga.
It really is. I mean, we're looking at a stack of documents here, transcripts, audio files, and they all center around this one date, late January 2020.
And that date, it just feels momentous in the context of this whole story.
It does. It feels, based on everything we're reading here, like a very heavy collective exhale for an entire country.
Exactly. A collective exhale. And at the very center of that exhale is one name, Ran Gvilli. Now, to get the pronunciation right, because this is important and the sources make a point of it, it's spelled Gvilli, but they emphasize the phonetic preservation. So it's D-Go-Eli.
Ran Gvilli. And to really get why this name is, the period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence, you have to look at the number.
Okay.
Specifically, one number that just it dominates the eulogies, the news coverage we have here, all of it. And that number is 843.
843. That's a staggering number. Let's just pause on that for a second. 843 days.
It is. I mean, just try to conceptualize that. That's the number of days Ran.
Almost 2.5 years.
2.5 years. Think about that timeline. That's birthdays, holidays, seasons changing, governments shifting, all while a family just waits.
Yeah.
In this agonizing limbo.
And the sources tell us he's the Yasam fighter. That's the special patrol unit of the police.
Right. And he went missing on October 7th, 2020. And for 843 days, his family, his friends, and really, according to these transcripts, the entire nation was just stuck waiting.
And the phrase that keeps coming up, the one that's the hook that really grabs you in all the news coverage, is this idea of him being the first to leave, last to return.
That's the whole narrative arc here. The sources, and we're talking specifically news anchors, the prime minister, they all frame this funeral not just as a burial for a soldier, but as the return of the final hostage.
With the final body.
The final body, yes, from the October 7th attacks. It's explicitly framed as closing at the end of a chapter.
So when we talk about this funeral, it's taking place in Maitar, a community down in the Negev. We're not just talking about a family saying goodbye.
No, not at all. We're talking about a symbolic closure for the entire event of the war and the hostage crisis as it relates to that.
And that's really our mission for this deep dive, isn't it? We have this incredible set of sources. We've got the transcripts from the funeral itself. We have the eulogies from his mother, Tali.
And Tali is just a force of nature in these docs, an absolute lioness.
Absolutely. And then his father, Itzik, his brother, Omri, his sister, Shira. But it's not just family. We also have speeches from the highest levels.
Right. Prime Minister Netanyahu, President Herzog, the Speaker of the Knesset, Amir Ohana, Minister Ben-Gvir. It's a heavy stack.
It's a very heavy stack. But what I love about having this material is that we can try to move past the headlines. We want to find the man behind the uniform. Because when you read the interviews with his friends or the stories from his sister, you realize this wasn't just a symbol.
No.
This was a guy who loved motorcycles, who was apparently a bit clumsy, and who pulled off this pretty wild deception on his mom just to get to the battlefield.
That story is incredible. It really is. And it speaks to the atmosphere of the funeral itself. You'd expect it to be purely somber. And of course, there's immense grief. You can feel it coming off the page.
Of course.
But the sources, they describe the atmosphere as being mixed with pride and even the word victory.
Victory. That is such a strange, almost jarring word for a funeral, isn't it?
It is. But as we go through the text, I think you'll see how they managed to redefine what victory even means in this specific, very painful context.
Okay, let's do it. Let's unpack this. I think we have to start with the man himself. Section 1 of our dive, the man behind the uniform.
A good place to start.
Because before he was this national symbol returning after 843 days, he was just Ran. And honestly, the description from his friend, a guy named Emmanuel, it gives us such a vivid picture. He calls him a clumsy giant.
That stood out to me so much. So often in these state funerals, a person becomes like a marble statue. They're perfected. They never made a mistake. They were flawless heroes.
Right. Sanctified.
Exactly. But Emmanuel just grounds him immediately. He says Ran was big, physically imposing, but he was prone to opening his head or getting injured. He was the kind of guy who was massive, but maybe didn't always know where his limbs were.
Right. He says he loved to get injured, which is such a buddy thing to say. It sounds like you're roasting your friend at a bar, not eulogizing him.
It does. It's so real. But then he pivots and he says this clumsy giant possessed a massive heart. And that seems to be the consensus across the board. The head of the council in Maitar, for example, he describes him as a bridge.
A bridge. What does he mean by that?
Well, he makes a point of saying this in a country that, the sources allude to as having internal division. The council head notes that Ran respected people regardless.
So he wasn't political.
It seems not. He wasn't looking at who you voted for. He was looking at who you were as a person. The idea is that he connected different parts of the society just by being himself, a unifier.
And then there's the motorcycle. This feels like a huge part of his identity in the sources.
Yeah.
His sister Shira talks about his love for this dangerous tool.
It's a really touching part of her eulogy, actually. Shira mentions that during the time he was missing, that long 843-day wait, she traveled to the east and she actually rode a motorcycle herself.
Wow.
She says she did it specifically to understand what moved. She wanted to feel what he felt on that machine, to get a piece of his passion.
That is such a specific, intimate way to connect with someone you've lost.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to see the world through their adrenaline, through their joy.
It really is.
But the motorcycle, it isn't just a hobby in this story. It's actually the catalyst for one of the most unbelievable parts of the entire October 7th narrative, at least when it comes to Ran.
This is the sick leave decision. And you're right, this is where the story becomes almost cinematic. It's a critical moment.
So set the scene for us. It's the morning of October 7, 2023. Where is Ran? What's his status?
He's at home.
Right.
He's officially on sick leave from the police force. And we're not talking about, I have a cold sick leave.
No.
He has a broken shoulder.
No.
Or a dislocated shoulder. The sources vary slightly on the exact term, but it's a severe shoulder.
And this was from a motorcycle.
Exactly. It had happened shortly before the war, so he's seriously injured. The sources mention he was actually scheduled for surgery just a couple of days.
So functionally speaking, he is not combat ready. He's not even close.
Not at all. He's barely arm ready. This is a guy who should be on the couch with an ice pack waiting for an operation.
Okay, so the news break. The sirens, the rockets, the reports of infiltrations. Ran sees what's happening. And obviously his first instinct is to go.
Of course. He's a Yasam fighter. His friends, his unit, they're all going south.
But his mom, Tali, and we're going to talk a lot more about Tali, she tries to stop him.
Naturally. I mean, any mother would. She sees her son with a broken wing, essentially. She tells him he can't go. She probably said something like, "You can't even lift your arm. How are you going to hold a rifle?"
And this is the moment. The sources describe it so clearly. Ran is sitting in a chair in his room. He's looking at his mom. He knows he has to convince her that he is fit to fight.
It's a battle of wills in a bedroom while a war is starting just outside the window. A very personal, intense moment.
So what does he do? How does he convince her?
He looks her in the eye.
Yeah.
And he grits his teeth. And he must have fought through what was just excruciating pain. And he lifts his arm. He moves it.
He just forces it.
He forces it. And he looks at her and says, according to the accounts, "Mom, look, I can move my hand. I'm fine."
He faked it.
He completely faked it. He put on a performance, deceived his mother to go to war.
That is, on one hand, that's incredible dedication. On the other, it's just heartbreaking because his sister Shira, in her eulogy, she dwells on this exact moment with so much regret.
It's one of the hardest parts. Shira says she wishes she had been a human shield. She actually fantasizes about stealing his car keys.
Stop.
She says, "What if I had just stood in the doorway and not let you leave?" She calls his departure the moment the forest burned down for her. Just this searing image of everything being destroyed in that one.
But he didn't listen. He wouldn't have. He got his father's car.
Right, because presumably his motorcycle wasn't an option, or maybe he needed the space for gear.
And he just drove south into the fight.
He viewed the injury as completely irrelevant. The sources quote some of the officials, like Speaker Ohana, saying his conscience made it wasn't a choice, really. The safety of his friends, of the country, it outweighed the pain in his own shoulder.
So he drives south. And this brings us right to section 2 of our dive, the Battle of Aluma.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't just drive to some staging area and wait for orders.
No, he drives straight into the fire.
Into the absolute heat of it.
And remember, he's Yasam, special police. The police commissioner gives a speech at the funeral where he highlights a critical disparity of that morning. He says the police, his officers, they went out with
Pistols.
Mostly pistols. Maybe some had long guns in their cars, but the first responders had their sidearm. And they were running headlong into terrorists who were armed with RPGs, heavy machine guns, grenade, a full infantry assault kit.
It's a complete mismatch. A mismatch of epic proportions. Yeah. And Ran is driving right into the middle of it, one-handed, basically.
And yet, despite that, the stats that are read out at the funeral by the highest official, they are just mind-blowing.
What are they?
Prime Minister Netanyahu and the police commissioner both state that Ran, in this condition, engaged in heavy combat at Kibbutz Alum, and they credit him personally with killing 14 terrorists.
14, with a broken shoulder.
That is the number that's in the official record, read out at his funeral. They say he essentially blocked the invasion into the kibbutz with his own body, held the line.
And the narrative that they build, it emphasizes that He fought until he had nothing left.
To the last bullet. That phrase is repeated over and over. He fought to the last bullet.
Feels like something out of a movie. But here it's being read into the state record by the Prime Minister.
It signifies that he didn't stop, he didn't retreat, didn't surrender. He fought until he literally had no...
And we have a window into those final moments, don't we? Through his brother, Omri.
We do. Omri's eulogy is incredibly powerful. He talks about the final phone calls.
Right. So it's around 10:45 a.m. on October 7th. Omri manages to get Ran on the phone.
And Omri is panicking. You can imagine he's seeing the news. He's trying to understand what's happening. And he asks his brother, what is going on?
And Ran's voice.
Omri describes it as cool, completely calm, professional. Ran just says, Omri, I'm in an incident. It's urgent.
I'm in an incident. That is the understatement of the century for a firefight with RPG.
It's the cop in him, right? It's the training, just the facts. Don't cause panic. Then there's a second call.
And what does he say then?
He says, let me finish what I'm doing. I'll talk to you later. Everything is fine.
Everything is fine.
And that was it. That was the last contact. The next thing they know, he's gone. He was killed in action, and his body was taken into God.
And that is the moment that begins the 843-day nightmare for the Gvilli family.
The vigil.
Which leads us right to section 3, the 843-day vigil. Because this story isn't just about the day he died. It's about the 2.5 years his family spent waiting, fighting, and just enduring.
And you cannot talk about that period without talking about his mother, Tali.
Tali Gvilli. The sources, multiple speakers, refer to her as a lioness. She seems to have been the engine of this family's survival, of their public campaign.
Absolutely. And she has this mantra, right? This public identity she creates.
You proud mother.
Yeah. In her eulogy, she tells this incredible story of how she coped. She says she would imagine Ran talking to her from above.
And what would he say?
She imagines him saying, Mom, don't cry, be proud. So she adopts this radical posture of pride. It's how she signs off her speeches, how she introduces herself at rallies, not as the grieving mother, not as the broken mother, but as Tali Gvilli, the proud mother.
It's almost like she's using pride as a shield against the despair, a weapon.
Absolutely, a psychological shield. And she needed it. She tells this other story about a rainbow that really illustrates her mindset during those dark years.
Okay.
She says it was a rainy day. She's driving with Iksik, the father, to a meeting with other hostage families in Ranana. And the weather is just miserable. It's pouring rain. It's gloomy. It's a perfect representation of their mood. The rain stops, and a massive full rainbow appears in the sky. And instead of just looking at it, Tali says they drove into it.
They drove into the rainbow?
Yeah. That's how she describes it, driving into the rainbow until it disappeared. And she said she felt in that moment that it was a direct sign.
A sign of what? What did it mean to her?
Hope. She says that sliver of hope that he might return. And she says even on one leg, that's what gave them the strength to endure. She held on to that image of the rainbow, her proof.
So while Tali was holding on to these spiritual signs, fighting with pride, the sister Shira was on a much more global mission.
Shira's story is the classic story of a life interrupt, a life put on hold indefinitely. She talks very movingly about this.
She traveled everywhere, right?
Everywhere. She went to the UN, she went to the U.S. Congress, she met with officials at the White House.
And she makes a specific point of mentioning speaking in English.
Yes, she specifically notes that. She says, I spoke in English to get him back. She wore the title of hostage's sister. Like a uniform. It was her job, her entire identity, 2.5 years.
And in her eulogy, there is this heartbreaking moment where she basically asks for permission to stop.
Yes. She says, allow me to take off the uniform and the title. Let me go back to being just Shira, Ran's sister. She just wants to be his sister again, not his advocate.
She wants to lay down that burden, a burden she carried across the world.
Exactly. She fought the diplomatic war while Ran fought the physical one. And she's finally done.
And what about the father? He seems much quieter in the transcripts, more in the background.
He is. He's described as humble, as quiet, often letting Tali take the lead in public. But his few words, when he does speak, they carry immense.
What does he focus?
He talks about the community. He calls Ran the child of everyone. He really emphasizes that they weren't alone in this.
And the sources really bear that out. The support was massive.
It was overwhelming, according to their accounts. They talk about flags at every intersection in their community, people leaving flowers, cakes, just constant signs of support.
And Tali has this one line. She says, 700 soldiers looked for him.
Yeah, she says 700 soldiers looked for him, found him, and brought him back. She frames it as the entire nation, the entire army, working for her son. It wasn't just a unit, it was a national effort.
Which brings us to the moment of truth, the end of the vigil, section 4, the return and the miracle.
And the operation itself, it had a name, Operation Brave.
Sounds like a Hollywood title. But this was a real complex military operation to retrieve the body from Gaza after all that time.
Incredibly dangerous, you have to.
And when the soldiers on the ground finally found him, they used a code word over the radio.
The diamond.
The diamond is in our hands.
I mean, just think about that. The diamond. That tells you everything about how valuable these individuals, even their remains, are to the society and to the military. It's not just objective secured. It's the diamond is in our hands.
But this is where the story takes a turn into something. Well, something unexplainable. Or at least something that the sources themselves treat as miraculous.
This is the condition of the body. And we have to be respectful, but also precise here, because the sources are very, very explicit about this.
Right. So Ran had been gone for 843 days in Gaza.
Logic, science, biology. Well, we know what that says should have happened.
Of course.
But Itzik, the father, stands up at the funeral, and he says this directly to the thousands of people there. He says, we opened the coffin, touched him, he was whole.
Whole. What does he mean by
Shalem is the Hebrew word. Complete. He says he was exactly as he left. And then he says the most unbelievable line. He says he hadn't decomposed.
After 2.5 years. That defies science.
It does, completely. And the chief rabbi, the Rishon LeZion, he seizes on this in his eulogy. He doesn't treat it as a biological anomaly. He treats it as a divine historical echo.
He connects it to something else.
He connects it to the Bar Kokhba revolt. We're going back 1900. It's an incredible piece of oratory. The rabbi tells the ancient story of the massacre at the fortress of Beitar.
Right, the last stand against the Romans.
Exactly. And the story goes that the Romans killed thousands of Jews and, as a final humiliation, refused to let them. They used the bodies to build fences around their vineyards. It's a horrific, traumatic image.
Just awful.
But the rabbi explains the ancient miracle then was that the bodies of the slain scholars and fighters did not rot. They remained preserved whole until they could finally be given a proper Jewish burial.
And he's drawing a direct line from that to Ran.
A direct line. He calls Ran's preservation a recurring miracle. He literally says history itself.
That is such a powerful theological connection to make. You're linking a modern police officer to an ancient revolt against the Roman Empire.
It frames Ran not just as a casualty of a 2023 conflict, but as a link in a 2,000-year chain of Jewish struggle and holiness. It elevates him to a mythical, almost saintly status.
And it doesn't stop there. Then there's a numerology, the gematria.
Yeah, Jewish mysticism has this deep connection to numbers, to finding meaning in them. And the father, Itzik, points this out. He notes that Ran was the 250th body returned from the October 7th attacks.
Okay, 250.
In gematria, where every Hebrew letter has a numerical value, the name Ran, which is spelled with the letters Resh, and Nun adds up to exactly 250.
You're kidding me.
I am not.
Yeah.
Resh is 200, Nun is 50, the sum is 250.
Oh.
So the father sees this as Ran arranging everything from above. It's not a coincidence to him. It's seen as a divine stamp of approval on the timing of his return. A final signal.
So you have this confluence of events. You have the whole body, you have the ancient parallel to the martyrs of Beitar, and you have the perfect number. It really cements the idea of a miracle in the eyes of the mourners.
It provides a kind of a spiritual closure that goes beyond just the physical closure of a burial.
And this allows the Prime Minister, Netanyahu, to use this moment to make a major declaration.
He uses this funeral to declare that the mission to return all hostages from the October 7th attack, both the living and the deceased, is now practically, he says, we promised and we delivered.
It's the end of that specific chapter. The news sources we have echo this. One of them says 250 kidnapped, all returned.
Which is a massive, definitive claim to make, but that is the assertion in the transcript. This is the closing of the book on that part of the crisis.
Okay, so this brings us to the Voices of the Nation 5, the eulogy, because this funeral stage becomes a plot. And this is where we see how Ran's death, his story, is being used to shape the future of the country.
It's a fascinating cross-section of Israeli society and politics in early 20s. You have the state leadership, you have the security ideologues, and you have the deeply personal grief of the family all on.
Let's start with the Prime Minister Netanyahu. He's looking at the big picture, the strategic implications.
He is. He's still talking about total victory. He's still using that exact phrase. He promises the dismantling of Hamas is ongoing and will be completed. But he doesn't just speak in rhetoric. He does something very concrete for Rand.
He announces a new settlement.
Two things, actually. First, a new settlement in the Negev, not far from where they are, to be called Renanim, which is a play on Rand's name.
Renanim. So that's a permanent mark on the map, a living community named for him.
Exact. And second, he announces a new pre-military academy, a Mekhiana, specifically for police and border guard training, which will also be established in Rand's.
So he's turning Rand's memory into an institution, a place
And his tone is completely different.
much softer. Much more pastoral.
Herzog plays the role of the national grandfather here, and he starts with something shocking. He starts with an apology.
An apology from the head of state.
A direct, explicit apology. He looks at the family, and he asks for their forgiveness on behalf.
Forgive us for not protecting.
And forgive us for taking so long to bring him home. That is a stark contrast to the victory. Herzog is acknowledging the state's failure.
And he doesn't stop there. He makes a call for a social change.
He does. He urges people not to wait for tragedies to show love and appreciation for one another. He invokes the concept of ahavat hanam, baseless love, unconditional love.
I remember that line. He says to look at the diamond in every Israeli.
Yes, he says, look at the diamond in the person standing next to you in the supermarket line. Don't wait for them to be in a coffin. It's a very humanistic.
Then we have the Speaker of the Knesset, Amir Ohana. He focuses on something else entirely. He zooms in on the choice.
Ohana's whole speech is about that moment in the chair. He says nobody would have blamed Ran for staying home. He had a doctor's note. He was medically unfit.
But his conscience made the decision.
That's Ohana's point. It was an act of pure will, of conscience. He compares that sacrifice to the silver platter, the famous poem by Nathan Alterman about the state being given to the people on a silver platter of its fault.
So he's placing Rand firmly in the national pantheon of heroes.
Absolutely. But then the tone on the stage shifts. Things get a bit more heated, shall we say. Minister Ben-Gvir takes the mic.
And Ben-Gvir, as the sources show, stays very true to his brand.
Completely. He uses this platform, this moment of national grief, to pivot immediately to his core policy.
The death penalty for terrorists.
Right out of the gate. He says Rand's legacy requires it. He connects Rand's personal struggle to the larger political fight for governance in the Negev. And he also picks up on this theme of DNA, calling the Gvilli family lions who don't.
And the head of the Council of Maitar, the local leader, goes even further with the biblical language. Much further.
He makes a direct public appeal to the prime minister, who is sitting right there on. He looks at him and says, wipe out the seed of
Amalek. For those who don't know, that is the biblical enemy that commands total destruction. It's not a call for compromise.
It is the most extreme invitation of total war in the Jewish tradition. And he states that the desire to destroy Israel still echoes in Gaza and around the world, and so the response must be equally total.
So let's just pause on that. On one state, in the space of less than an hour, you have President Herzog asking for baseless love and unity among Israel.
And the local council head asking the prime minister to wipe out the seed of Amalek.
That is the tension of the entire society right there, all united under this single banner of mourning Rand, but drawing radically different conclusions about what his death should mean for the future.
It's a perfect snapshot.
And amidst all this statecraft and ideology, you still have the family who just have to say goodbye. Omri, the brother.
Omri's eulogy is it's heartbreaking, but so strong. He admits the pain is huge, it's unbearable, but then he says, the pride is strong.
And he has that line about Rand being his little brother.
He says, my little brother. But as everyone knows, it's this beautiful acknowledgement of Rand's stature, not just physically, but morally.
And he promises to take over the role of protector for the family.
He steps into the void that Rand left. He promises to look after their parents, and then there's Shira.
Shira's eulogy feels the most personal, the most intimate.
It is. She doesn't talk about settlements or Amalek or national politics. She talks about a trip to South America.
They were supposed to go together, weren't they?
It was their dream. She says the tickets were bought, the plans were made, and she just talks about this trip that will now never, ever happen. It's so concrete. And at the end, she just asks him to appear in her such a simple human. And it's a powerful reminder that while the state gets a new settlement called Renanim, the sister just gets a miss on a...
That's a perfect transition into our final section here. Section 6, themes and analysis. We've heard all the voices. We've seen the miracle. Now, what does it all mean? What are the big takes?
I think the first major theme we have to talk about is the redefinition of...
How so? What do you mean by that?
Well, think about it from the outside. This is a funeral. A young man is dead. He's been dead for 2.5 years. Objectively, this is a tragedy, a loss.
Right.
But Omri, his own brother, calls the image of the funeral a victory. Netanyahu declares it a day of pride, not just more. The entire narrative is...
So it's like just getting him back, even in a coffin, that becomes the win?
Exactly. The bar for victory has been forced to shift. It's no longer, we saved his life. We brought him home to rest in the soil of his own country. The sources talk about this tension between eyes weeping bitterly and a joyful heart. They've managed to frame the closure itself as a triumph of national pursuit. We didn't leave him behind. That is the victory.
And then there's this recurring concept of DNA. We heard it from Ben-Gvir, but others mention it too.
It's this idea of Israeli resilience being a kind of genetic trait. They talk about Rand's upbringing, the strength of his parents, as if heroism is something you are literally bred for. It reinforces the idea that the nation is a family and that this family shares a specific DNA of not breaking, of being lion.
But there's a conflict in that DNA, a dual strand maybe?
A huge conflict. As we just noted, on that one stage, you have the DNA of Ahav Hainam, unconditional love and unity, being promoted by the president, versus the DNA of Amalek, total vengeance, being promoted by others.
And both sides claim Ran as their symbol.
Both claim his legacy as justification for their world.
And finally, the theme of legacy preservation.
It's happening on every possible level here. You have the physical legacy, the new settlement, Renanim. You have the educational, the new police academy, a living legacy and a teaching.
The spiritual
Legacy. The preservation of the body itself is used to sanctify the cause. It turns the soldier into a martyr, a saint. His very cells are presented as proof of his righteousness.
It's a lot to process. The personal grief, the national mythology, the political maneuvering.
It is. It's a story that operates on the level of a single family's kitchen table and on the level of grand national death, all at the same time.
So let's wrap this up. We started with the date, late January 2026, the final return.
And with the man, Ran Gvilli, the man who tricked his mother to go to war, who fought with a broken shoulder and saved a kibbutz.
And whose return, according to all these sources we've looked at, marks the symbolic end of the hostage crisis from October 7th.
A day of pride, they call it. This incredible paradox of celebration and mourning all wrapped.
I want to leave you, our listener, with a final thought, a question to mull over that builds on everything we've talked about.
Go for it.
We see a society here that is, in a very real and tangible way, building its future in the name of a fallen soldier. They are building a settlement called Renanim, where children will grow up. They are building a school where cadets will train to be the next Ran Gvilli.
Right. It's a very active form of memorialization.
Exactly. So my question is this. When a society builds its future institutions, its homes, its schools, explicitly in the name of its fallen martyrs, how does that shape the identity of the next generation who will live in those homes and attend those schools?
That's a deep question.
Is the legacy of Ran Gvilli just about remembering how he died, fighting bravely to the last bullet, or is it becoming a blueprint for how the nation expects its children to live?
Are they building a memorial or are they building a mold?
Something to think about. Thank you for diving deep with us today.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.